Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of In the Grand Schema of Things, where I talk about all sorts of things that are data related, but mostly I talk modeling in this particular podcast. I also have podcasts like DataNation and Select Star from Data.Lake, where I also talk about data concepts, those more technological kind of things. But today what I want to talk about is what is Data Vault. So there's many ways you can handle modeling your data in a data warehouse or even a data lake house. So nowadays you're starting to see more people take what they used to do in a data warehouse and now just do that modeling on their data lake, aka the data lake house. But the idea is you're still warehousing the data, is just where the data is stored is changing. So it doesn't negate the fact that you need to think through how you're going to model the data in that location. Okay, so just because a lake house is a little bit more flexible doesn't mean you still don't want to model your data just for organization, for ease of access, and ease of business understanding. So one approach is called Data Vault. So again, there's your dimensional modeling. Okay, your star schemas, your snowflake schemas, where you have a fact table. Okay, so let's say the fact is like sales. And then basically different parts of sales become these different dimensional tables. Okay, so you might, every sale probably has a customer you sold to, an agent who did the selling. So these would be your dimension tables. The way Data Vault works is that it thinks of things not as dimensions and facts, but as hubs, links, and satellites. Okay, so essentially in the same way we have, so basically if I were to take that same sales, okay, what's going to happen is that we still would have agents and customers, but agents and customers would be hubs. Okay, so they are things. Okay, and you would have a hub table that really just has the ID of that agent, the ID of that customer, and essentially that table basically allows us to have a distinct count of how many customers and how many agents we have purely there, and that's pretty much all it has. It's just basically the thing that allows us to know how many unique items we have. And essentially, like the ID would be the primary key, the thing that kind of makes sure that we are each thing represents a unique thing. Now, in the case of the dimensional model, the fact table kind of connected the agent and the customer because they were both parties to that sale. Now, in Data Vault, that sale would now be a link. Okay, so it wouldn't be considered a fact table, but a link. And a link would be similarly where you'd have a list of sales with which would just have the foreign key. So essentially it would just be like the unique ID of that particular sale, and then the IDs of the let's say the customer and the agent who were party to that sale, and maybe a product if we're talking, if we want to keep extending this out. Okay, so right now none of these tables, these link tables or these hub details have the actual details. Okay, so who's the name of the agent, who's the name of the customer, not in the hub. Okay, the details of the purchase, like how much was the total of the purchase, none of that is in the link. Those are just there to provide unique IDs and to provide a table that has a unique number for the number of unique items. Okay, so so then what's going to happen is you have a third category of table called satellites. And satellites are essentially going to be very similar to the slowly changing dimensions 4 type, where you essentially have a separate history table. So in this case, you might have a products satellite, or let's say actually go to a customer satellite, and essentially like the first time when, let's say, Bob Jones, our customer, signs up, there's an entry, in the customer satellite and in the customer hub. So there's a customer hub that gives Bob his unique ID, and then there's an entry in the satellite that actually has all the details of Bob connected to that ID. Now later on, Bob changes his address. You don't update the hub because he already exists in the hub. What we do is we make a new entry in the satellite, okay, and then each entry would have like a date that it was added or loaded into the satellite. And essentially we know, hey, what's the most current information because it's the one that was loaded most recently. Okay, but so basically, again, it's essentially a history of changes table. So in the satellite, you can have multiple records for the same unique thing. So for the same agent, for the same customer, and then you even have satellite tables that are satellites for the links. Okay, so you can actually have multiple entries for a purchase. So imagine like, hey, we have a purchase, then later on we amend the price for the purchase. We would then add another entry to the satellite So in this case, I never lose track of how many unique purchases or sales occurred because I can always look at that sales link table, but I can always track the historical changes to the historical changes to that. And then again later on, if we decide to change the schema altogether, okay, so let's say we decide to change the schema of what data we track per customer, whatnot. Okay, you can always just add another satellite. So I can then just add another satellite with the change in schema and still keep then that old data in the old satellite, but the IDs for that customer doesn't change. The IDs for the purchases don't same. We just now maybe use the new satellite. So it makes it easier, one, to track history and also to do schema changes later on, because basically I can track new data in a new satellite with the new schema, and then I can still go see the old data with the old schema and the old satellite, because they're all track, all the ID numbers, all the IDs of customers, purchases and whatnot are unique to sort of the satellites that actually contain the details. Okay, so I can have multiple satellites tracking sales of particular different time frames, and then I can just kind of match things up appropriately. So it's a very flexible way of doing it. Now, of course, it's also can be a little bit more complicated to understand up front, which is oftentimes why people default to dimensional modeling, because it's just a little bit easier to think through. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what Data Vault is. I wouldn't call myself like an authority on Data Vault, but hopefully this at least gives you the idea of at the high level what it is, so you can look more into it if you want. If it's something you want to try out, I definitely see the virtue of it. I see the virtue of the flexibility of being able to have my IDs separated from sort of my schemas, in a sense. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. My name is Alex Merced. Make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at @AMDataLakehouse. And subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends to subscribe to this podcast, because I talk about things that hopefully you think are cool. And I'll see you all later.